Hi, everybody. Welcome to Human Rights for Human Beings, specifically how to incorporate human rights into your daily life. My name is Catherine Carrillo, and this entire project is much more a reflection and a conversation, because at the end of this, I'm going to ask you to start more of a conversation with others as well. And this project wraps up as an end to 2.5 years with my master's projects and dissertation with Arizona State in human rights and social justice, and is also influenced by my last 5 years of service with the military as an intelligence officer. So collected with both of those, as I'm wrapping everything up, I kind of came to some conclusions about a lot of the issues that we study and we've seen, and I wanted to share them in a conversational format with everybody. So hopefully it goes a little further than just an academic discussion that really alienates a lot of people, or speaking in a lot of terms and jargon that, again, just most people don't understand. I still don't understand all of it, let's be frank. So really studying human rights across a bunch of different topics, from migration to refugees to sex trafficking to humanitarianism and social development. It was really a lot of study of kind of what went wrong and the history of really how we got there. And so my takeaway after having studied it and then having lived in it, working internationally for so long, I kind of took all the data points of the different types of failure and realized that there was enough data points that it really wasn't any individual reason. Each reason or each problem kind of had their own individual reasons why something went wrong. But overall, they all fell under this human rights system that it wasn't serving us anymore. The way it was currently constructed, with human rights at an international level as an authority over the states or your national governments, just wasn't working. It was too detached from humanity. And with a brief history of human rights was originally put up to the international level because states had proven again and again that they were failing at upholding human rights for their citizens, for the people who lived under their authority, as well as just other human beings in other nations. And so, following a logical progression, they said, okay, for authority, we're going to put human rights above you in this new international global governance that we're creating. And the problem that we really see with that now is that the authority of human rights does not come from being international, by being over everybody. The idea of human rights is that these are the rights given to you merely because you are born and you are human. So the authority for human rights actually comes from humans, from being a human being. And so by removing human rights, access to them, understanding of them, and moving it above, we actually really lost a lot of almost the tangible action that human beings, individuals, and then humanity as a whole could use as tools against violating parties. And why that matters so much, by putting it above, not only did it really detach us from this authority that we have, but it also led the way for a lot of other issues we see that kind of is like Western-centric look. So there's just one answer. There could only be one answer for all of humanity. And I think when we look at stuff, I mean, I don't even agree with my neighbors sometimes. How are we going to say that what I think is right is going to be the same as someone in Sri Lanka or France or Indonesia or Gabon? And so when we moved human rights above, we just did not account for the diversity of thought within the world to encompass everything. And I think nowadays, especially, we just see how much diversity is important. But the whole purpose of this project here and the reflection with this conversation is the fact that more people need to be involved with human rights and talking about it just in this casual setting as the authority figures on human rights, but also because of all of these problems we have and we don't have answers. We need more people who are living it, who are being in these situations within the societies to say, okay, like, I know myself better than anybody. I know my society better than somebody who's even above my own national government. And here's how we can apply for change. So that was kind of the overall reflection and theme that I saw after all of this study. And I didn't just want to stop there. I think it's always easy to kind of point out a problem. But the biggest thing is then telling people, okay, how do we solve it? And there isn't a solution here, I'm sorry, but that is kind of what this conversation turns to, of that I shouldn't be the one coming up with a solution. It shouldn't be I don't have that authority for everybody. So I wanted to break down kind of a 3-step process that gets you thinking about how to start looking at human rights for yourself on a daily life in your local area, and really remove it from this idea that it has to be international, that it's national governments in charge, that it's something that happens, far away from me. So step 1 of that is what I call empowered education. So education, obviously really valuable. That doesn't really need to be explained. And it's just a common understanding that you can't study something and talk about it if you don't really know what it is. But because there is such a long history of human rights really not being implemented correctly, what I see a lot of people doing when they study the history of human rights is just a frustration. And I also had the same, was very frustrated about 2 years into studying my master's and working, that I was like, there's not an answer. This is ridiculous. What are we doing? And so what empowered education is looking and learning about human rights, talking about human rights, but learning about it with this idea that this is something I can use. This isn't something that I'm just going to learn. It's something that's going to come up in a trivia game and I'm going to beat my cousin at it. This is really a tool in your toolbox. Like, this is an action that you can do because you have this authority. And the way you can kind of think about it tool-wise is it's almost 3-pronged. So it's a tool to view things, kind of like glasses. It helps you see what is required and what is being violated, not only for your own level, but also internationally, just on the other side of your country. It gives you a way to view things in a grounded ideal that can be applied to multiple situations, even if you don't necessarily understand everything that's going on. Like, you have the bare minimum of human rights to understand kind of where a situation is going. And then a tool of action, now you've learned about human rights, you know how they interact, you know what they mean for you. This now gives you a tool to go forward when you're speaking to authority figures, whether you're on social media, kind of speaking about a campaign or anything like that. And that helps balance. Well, we've seen a lot in human rights violations everywhere. You get to the nitty-gritty of human rights violations, and it is a power imbalance. That's all it is. It comes down to power. It comes down to one party either looking at another group of people or individuals and saying, your human rights don't matter, so I'm going to violate them, or my human rights matter more than yours, which is the same thing. It's a counter violation. So by using human rights as a tool that we can see what's happening, oh, now I can kind of see, okay, I see this clearer and how this works. I have this tool now to use it as action, to go forth, to do something, to start a conversation with a backing in something that really will actually lead to more action from others. to then have this balance where everybody is respected within a certain environment or situation. And the second step is radical acceptance, which I completely stole from psychology. I'm going to read to you because I'm not a psychologist, but radical acceptance can be defined as the ability to accept situations that are outside of your control without judging them, which in turn reduces suffering that is caused by them. So I think the two big keywords with radical acceptance is obviously acceptance, so control and judgment and suffering. And it's kind of a three step within the 3 steps with radical acceptance. The first and almost the hardest one is you have to accept human rights for yourself. And that, I know that almost seems pretty easy, like, oh, I get these protections, I get these, this is great, cool, of course I want that. But when you look at human rights, there is so much, like your entire life is given to say, these are the basics that you deserve, not based on your worth, not based on how many hours in the week you work, not based on your religion, not based on anything that you do or say. This is what should be guaranteed to you. And there are many cultural biases, there are many personal biases that get in the way where we don't even recognize the human rights for ourselves. And a key part of that, not just to accept it for yourself because you are a human being and you are a part of humanity, but moving into the second spot of recognizing it for others is that it's more difficult to fight for something and a value for others when you don't understand the value. And so radical acceptance for me was a large journey of accepting that I do deserve these rights just for being born. It was a journey for me. But now I hold on to that so deeply, and it's such a conviction, and it's so valuable to me that when I see other people's human rights, even verging on violation or being blatantly violated, I understand how important that feeling is. And it is very much the emotional undertone of human rights that nobody really talks about. We look at human rights in forms of legislation and policy and action, which is great. I mean, that's very much a tool of action. But with radical acceptance, we're also accepting that there are very much emotions involved that shouldn't be discounted because there are humans involved. This is not about law. This is not about policy. This is not about a campaign. These are about human beings who are suffering and being violated that requires action. And so by ignoring this, we're really ignoring a massive part of human rights. And then that third step is the judgment. And then, so it's a non-judgmental relationship between yourself and others. And this one, again, there's not really an exact answer because it really is going to change based on your own biases and the other person, how they're presenting to you. So this actually really falls into the kind of the idea of discrimination, that, okay, I accept my value as a human being, but you don't fit that, so I think you're wrong and you don't deserve this anymore. You are a lesser human than me, so you have lesser rights. And with radical acceptance, that doesn't happen. We may disagree with them, but if you come to people in their actions and see it without judgment and use that tool of viewing back from education and say, okay, I view this through a lens of human rights in a non-judgmental way. I disagree emotionally with what you're saying, but that's a human right and I'm going to respect it. And that really helps overcome so many of the issues that we see today with discriminatory policies, governments systematically ostracizing other people to a point because they are dehumanizing them. I think probably, I mean, the best example that's really extreme, but for people who don't quite understand kind of where that's getting at, is the Holocaust. I mean, the Holocaust is actually one of a major reason that human rights were developed in 1948. So it's very applicable. But with the Holocaust and almost any other genocide on record, governments and people in power had to dehumanize other human beings to the point where we, as a local population and those in power, felt that it was morally and ethically okay to violate and kill in such a way. And so with the non-judgmental relationship is barring that from ever happening, that even though I disagree, even though I would never live my life that way. Now I'm not acting on those biases. If I have a bias from my religion, from my cultural upbringing, being aware of that, looking at another culture or religion, because those tend to be kind of the lines that we see a lot of people draw, and it being different, but not acting on that, not acting on that fear or that bias. And that overcomes a lot of the issues we see in human rights as well. But again, it's on a human level, which is why this discussion about human rights for humanity becomes so much more important, because it's where a lot of the issues are. And so the last one is local action. It's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to get all this information. You're going to think about it. You're going to feel it. You're going to understand it. And then you're going to want to go out and do something because you're going to see it or you're going to understand it. And you hopefully will feel empowered that I now have the tools to do something about it in a way that is effective. Because now human rights should be accessible to you. And they're broad enough that they're actionable in a way that it can be applied to anything you come up against. It's not, you're not hammering in a screw. It's a multi-use Swiss Army knife of tools. But the emphasis on local is also because in a lot of the studies, what we did see is that there is a lack of recognition, again, kind of for the biases that come back from radical acceptance, but more of systematic unconscious biases. So Western-centric thinking. Everybody has to have a democracy. Colonialism, the effects of that in a lot of global South, kind of what we call like non-Western Europe, America, ideals. And so taking it at a local level means that you will have a higher level of understanding because you live in it. And what we have seen a lot is when it is done internationally, there's a heightened risk for violations even from people trying to help because they don't fully understand the culture. They don't fully understand the situations that are happening, what caused it, why caused it. And oftentimes they are remnants of colonialism. And so when you have someone whose ancestors were previously the power in that situation, you're perpetuating it in a new way. So we emphasize local action to combat that. And it kind of goes back to the whole idea of diversity. We're going to have different answers for different situations. It's not a copy paste. So work with what you know, where you have the most effect, because every organization, or excuse me, every community really can increase their human rights. So there really is work to do locally. And kind of why these 3 steps, and actually almost in this order specifically, is also kind of a response to a lot of the faults I've studied over the past couple of years. So if you have, obviously you need education, but what I have seen is people who kind of accept human rights, they read them once, they have a general idea, and they're like, absolutely, this is amazing, I'm gonna go do something with it. And those are often the people who go out internationally because they don't understand that human rights can be local, should be local, and then end up almost causing more violations and more discrimination because they don't have an education of other people's experiences and background. So that's extremely common in humanitarianism, and like international human rights is really a large problem that we see. And then if you don't have radical acceptance, which I'd say a lot of people don't who work with it, you lose that emotional understanding. You're educated on it, and then you go do something, but you don't incorporate the human aspects of it, your own emotional attachment and understandings going into the situation, as well as those of the people you are working with. And by ignoring that, you are erasing so much of the humanity involved of it that it puts you so much closer to risk of violation. And then local action, we kind of already hit on that. There's so many ways without the other two that it just really kind of gets into a gray area without the full acceptance. So kind of to summarize all of that up, I just really, after all this study, just want everybody to understand that human rights, it's not this academic ideal. It's not this massive international conundrum that's very confusing. It is an authority that is given to you. Someone sitting on your couch watching Netflix, somewhat like every single person in the world has this authority. And I think by the way our systems are set up right now is that we've been robbed of that. And the only way to take that authority back is by yourself. You have to take that back. No one is going to give that back to you. There is zero history of that happening. It's only been more removed and removed. So what I want people to feel is that recognize this authority in yourself, and hopefully with this conversation, have the beginning steps of how to take that authority back and how to get others involved. Because human rights isn't about the individual for the most part, until you get into violations. It's about humanity. It is about the global collective basic necessities of every single person on this globe. So taking that and then sharing that with everybody else for a collective authority, which actually will help us overcome so many of these issues that we are seeing, that is really the power of this interaction, of this conversation. And this step, this website, is probably only maybe like the middle of the road for me. And I hope it is a beginning step for you to get those reflections, to really start thinking about it, to start seeing it. How does this look in my everyday life? How can I use this? How can I feel empowered by this? And how can I give that to other people for the betterment really of societies as a whole, and hopefully just get us so much closer to the idea of human rights that I think we all agree with and understand so much value in. So I hope this conversation sparks some interest in you. I hope it is the beginning of a wonderful educational journey for you towards local action for our society as a whole. Thank you so much.